Maybe step a little bit to the left. That'd be perfect.
So basically, this is going to be a precursor to, we're going to actually go out and look at the air.
Today?
Not today.
Well, next week.
I'm saying next week, but I'm trying to give you the information because, okay, when we go out to actually look at the Eruv, there's certain parts that I can just show you then.
You started?
But there are certain things when you go out to look at the Eruv and it's at the top of the utility poles, even when I point to it, it's not very easily seen or understood. So that's most of what my focus is going to be, so when we do go out and I'm showing you things with the wires, you'll be able to understand it. So the basic idea with the Eruv is we want to surround the entire city with either fences or tzuras ha-pesachs, so that we enclose it and it becomes a chatzar. If you're learning Maseches Eruvin and you want to know why it's not a mavui, I don't really know the answer to that question. I know Shlomo Zalman has a long thing in Minchas Shlomo as to why the streets are not considered mavuis once you surround them. Even once they're enclosed, they could be considered to be mavuis, which would mean if you have like a mavui akum, you would need a tzuras ha-pesach at every single corner, everywhere in Passaic. So he has a discussion of that. If you're learning the Masech and you get into it, we, for some reason, assume that, and he gets into it, why that once we enclose the whole thing, it becomes now like a chatzar. And so the biggest challenge is not the fences, although maybe when we go out there, I'll show you some things with the fences and some of the issues. But the main thing is making the tzuras ha-pesachs with the telephone poles and how the wires present themselves on the telephone poles and how the brackets present themselves on the telephone poles and the technicalities of that and how you end up making a tzuras ha-pesach. So the simplest thing is you want to have a kana mikan al gavehem. Now, the first thing is what's al gava. So and a lot of utility poles, they have this resistor sticking up, which I found somewhere, and they'll have a wire running over the top of this resistor. So the question is this called al gava? This is the pole. This goes down to the ground. This part doesn't go down to the ground. So, Rav Heinemann, he holds that if it goes like this, it's good enough, and it's based on the Tshuvas Maaseh Avram. That the Tshuvas Maaseh Avram says that this is considered to be like the continuation of a pole, and as long as the wire runs over this, that's considered al gava. Now, one of the things that will be important to look at is you'll notice there's this channel here. Sometimes when the road's turning, they'll put the wire here, and then it doesn't run over this. And the only way to be matter is consider this to be a continuation of the pole. But this piece here, which is wider than it is taller, is not considered to be an extension going upwards. So if the wire runs here, it's not over the pole. Over here, it can depend. If the pole is tilted slightly, then it could be going over the pole. It's because it's going over this part of the pole. If it goes over this, it's also good. And then often in some parts of our Eruv, they just redid. A lot of these new poles that they put out here, I love them. It's Eruv Builders Nirvana because it goes like this. And you don't have to put a lechi on the pole because the wire is al gava. This is your lechi.
Why
This is your
doesn't Maimon
kanamikan.
help? Why doesn't Maimon help make it that it's considered?
So one of the
The
things,
top part,
the
you
Maaseh
said.
Avram brings he brings a raya from the fact that the machta, the pan of the Kohen Gadol, they used to lash two pieces together and it's considered to be one. So he says once it's connected together, it's considered to be one. One of the reasons why, and this is the difference, some Eruvin accept it, so we in our Eruv do not allow the wire to run like this. We'll only do it if it actually goes over the pole. We're machmir. One of the reasons why we're machmir is that Rabbi Zubnik had a kasha on this heter, which was like this. If I have a left, usually, let's say the wires don't run over the top of the pole. The wires usually run on the side of the pole, the communication lines, and that's usually what we use for the Eruv. So we'll usually run a lefty up the pole, and we'll run a lefty up this pole here, a piece of conduit, and that's going to be our tzuras ha-pesach. This is the kana mikan, this is the kana mikan, and this is the kana shal gavehem.
Do the lefty all the way up to the wire? Has to touch or you don't?
Well, we usually do run it all the way up to the wire because if you don't run it up to the wire using gurachis, and gurachis works a little bit funny, it works straight. So gurachis is, let's say you have a pole that's somewhat like tilted like that one, and you would put your lechi part way up 10 tefachim up, and your wire's running over here. So good up is going to go straight up like this from the top of the lechi. because good office goes straight plumb. So since telephone poles are hardly ever straight, if you only go 10 tefachim up, it usually won't be under the wire.
With the lefty at an angle also, does that work?
Oh, so left at an angle, that's also a problem. Remind me to get back to that. That's a problem too.
But why isn't it the same thing? It should be a plumb one. Go this, and then once you hit it, go straight up.
You could do that. You could make your lefty sideways and make sure that it's plumb right under the wire, but it's extremely hard to do it.
Right.
And then when the pole shifts back and forth, because these poles shift, they dig a hole 5 feet plus 1 foot for every 30 feet into the ground, and then they just put it in. There's no cement. There's nothing holding your telephone pole in. It shifts with time.
Oh, thanks.
So no, they're very secure. If you ever seen a car hit a telephone pole, you know they don't come down. The difference in telephone poles and light poles. The light poles are designed that they fall when a car hits them. Telephone poles are designed that they should win because you don't want all the electrical stuff coming down. So my Zupnik's question on this was that, let's say I have this lechi goes all the way up to the top there. Let's say the bottom of the lechi was knocked out. Something happened to it. It's more than 3 tefachim from the ground, so you can't say lavud. Everybody agrees this would not be good. All the poskim that you speak to would say this is not good. So Rabbi Zupnik said, well, why is this any different? If I have the wire running on the side here, this lechi doesn't go all the way down to the ground. So why would this not be good and this be good? So he wasn't happy using the kula of allowing the wire to run over the side. When I write my sefer, the Pia Ason, I have my answer, which is that this is a extension of the top. So you could call this the top. When you have something like this, this is not a top of the pole. If you ask a guy, take this apple and stick it on the top. He might put it here, he might put it here. These are both tops. But he wouldn't put it on the top of something that's just sitting on the side. That's not a top of the pole. But that's my teretz, Rabbi Zupnik's kasha. It happens to be that Rav Heinemann, when he was in Lakewood many years ago, so he had a whole bunch of shilas for Rav Aaron when he finished Maseches Eruvin, and he went to Rav Aaron and he asked him the shilas. Rav Aaron says, "No gela maisa." He said no, so Rav Aaron didn't want to answer them. So then Rav Heinemann, in his own style, built an Eruv that was all contrived. He didn't need the Eruv, but it went up fire escapes, it went here and then. He put all of his shilas into this little Eruv, and then he told Rav Aaron it's lamaisa and came to get a psakim. So one of the things that Rav Heinemann did was he took a 2x4 like this. He took another 2x4 like this, and he made it Sursa Pesach going this way to another thing, and another Sursa Pesach going this way. And he asked that both, and this was more than 3 tefachim. This was not lavud from here to here. So he asked Rav Aaron. Rav Aaron said both of these Sursa Pesachs are good. And this is basically the same configuration as this, if you would have the wire running on top here. So Rav Heinemann asked him, but this lechi is not straight. So Rav Aaron said, where does it say that a lechi has to be straight? And based on that, Rav Heinemann allows, in his Eruvin, to have the wire running in this direction where it doesn't go over the top of the pole. And that's, when I built under Rav Heinemann or under Rav Hershel Schachter, we allow the wire to be running here. Here in Passaic, we only allow it if the wire actually goes over this pole. Like Rav Elyashiv is not okay with this. He says the lechi does have to be straight. And then getting back to your question, Rav Elyashiv says even that if the lechi is like this, that since the wire is not running over the bottom 10 tefachim, that's no good. So there's a fellow in Israel, Mr. Haddad, and he does what I do in Eretz Yisrael. And what's interesting is, I asked him, if I moved to Eretz Yisrael, could I do what you do? He said, it's an entirely different profession. It's not even the same profession, what I do and what you do. Because they don't build them with utility poles there. They plant poles going around the city. He buys cement by the truckload, and they cement poles, they buy poles, and they just go around the entire city and plant their own poles. And they make sure that their own poles are straight.
Shift. If they cement them in, they never shift.
They cement them in so they don't shift, and they make them themselves, and they make sure that they're straight. So when I showed him that we had a lechi like this, and that the lechis weren't completely straight, there's two types of not straight. There's this type of not straight, and then there's also, if you have a lechi that goes, sometimes there's other items on the pole, and the lechi will kind of curve as it goes up the pole. So none of my lechis should be that bad, but sometimes they'll be like that. And Eric, he saw some lefties that looked like this, and he was just like aghast. You would allow that? you still call yourself Shomer Shabbos, and he didn't say it quite like that, but he knows from his customers he could never build like that. And when I showed him that, the Rav Heinemann says as long as it's always continuing in an upward motion, that's fine. So the lechi can't be going like this and then go up. But as long as it's always going somewhat in an upward motion, he'll allow it. So this is the first thing when we go out to look at the Eruv, we'll see that which ones are like this, which ones are like this, and when we chose to put a lechi, and when we're okay just using the top wire.
Why don't you just take the same thing, use a lechi, and just extend that metal to the floor?
Oh, so the reason is that this is in the electrical theater on a utility pole. You'll see there's like there's a bunch of wires near the top, the break of about 10 feet, and then there's the communication wires. I can only go near the communication wires. We can't go anywhere near the electrical stuff because that stuff, you don't even have to touch it to die. You can just come close to it. So it's a problem. In Muncie, they were thinking when they were building the Eruv, could we pay the utility company to move all of their wires to be running over the top of the pole? Utility company wanted like $250 a pole, and it was just prohibitively expensive. But I personally think with hindsight, they probably would have saved money if they did it.
Why can't you consider the telephone pole the lechi, isn't it?
No, if the wire is running over this way,
Oh.
so then it's running. The telephone pole can be the left, but the wire has to be running over the
Okay.
telephone pole. Where in our area, if it's running like this, we won't allow it, even though some do, and even those
Then
who
you
do,
gotta-
if it's like this, well, if it's like this, then they will not. So it depends which.
Because it's not considered the top.
Because it has to be running. This is considered to be an extension of this pole.
Do I understand?
So this is not running over anymore over this piece. It's running over this, but this, since it's wider than it is taller,
That's not an
is
extension.
not considered
of,
an extension going up.
So it's from the outside.
That would be outside, right? Okay, that's the first thing, these top wires. The next thing that we're gonna see also is, so when we do these communication wires, so this has really little through there, but just you'll understand me when I'm talking when we go out there. I was gonna drill a hole so I could actually present it, but this, and imagine it goes through the wall. This is the way most communication wires work on the telephone pole. The wire, you'll have a steel cable that runs in this bracket, and the bolt will go through the pole. And we're gonna wanna be underneath this wire as it goes. All the communication cables will be dangling on this, you don't want the communication wires, the fiber optic cables, to be holding their own weight. So they run a steel cable from telephone pole to telephone pole. It's bolted in like this. So when I say the first wire, that'll be this bracket. There'll be another bracket like this at the second wire, another bracket at the third wire. There may be tons of communication cables hanging all over the place. When I refer to the first wire, the second wire, and the third wire, it's these brackets that we're dealing with.
It's the metal ones, not
Yes,
the.
these metal cables, right. That's really what we're using. Now, sometimes you have, one pole doesn't line up exactly with the next pole. So when the wire leaves the bracket, it turns slightly, like this. Now, the Chazon Ish says that the wire has to run straight from pole to pole. So here's my eraser. This Chazon Ish is an interesting thing because some Eruvin are knocking on it, most citywide Eruvin can't be. This is the aerial view of the two poles, and here's the wire going from here to here. So the Chazon Ish says you'd make like an imaginary line from here to here. If the wire goes out from in between this shetach here, it's no good. So if he says like if the wind is blowing and the wire goes out like this, he says while the wind is blowing, there it's possible. Now,
Is that loose? The wires are that loose that they can blow?
so it happens to be the steel cables are loose, they have to be. In the lineman's cable manual, they have how much they have to slack they have to put in there. Because if they're too tight from
Oh, right.
winter to summer, they'll snap. So they're intentionally, although they're also, they don't generally blow in the wind. In Ruch Mitsuya, they won't blow. When I run my own wires made out of fishing line, I make them very tight because those will blow very easily. But,
And they have give, so that's not a problem for the summer winter.
and they snap too. They do have some give in them. and they do snap sometimes. Much more often than those things do. So the question is, how do you get your wires to run straight? Now, our lechis are 1-inch conduit. They're about this big. So if you're putting your lechi underneath the bracket here, which is usually, I prefer to put my lechi right underneath here, and if the wire turns as it's leaving the bracket, as it often will, then you run into a problem. So we often will have to position the lechi here, we'll have to position the lechi here, so that, let's say the wire's straight coming in, and it turns leaving, then I'll position my bracket, my lechi right over here. It'll be straight coming in, and it'll be turning as it leaves. So Rav Heinemann,
I'm sorry, you have 2 lechis on the one pole?
yeah, we'll have 2 lechis on one pole.
At each pivot point.
Right. Now,
But then somewhere in the middle, in between the poles, it'll move out a little bit.
so somewhere in between the poles, sometimes you'll have a service line going off that'll pull it. So I will generally move those service lines in our Eruv. One of the differences between our Eruv and let's say the Fairlawn Eruv and the Teaneck Eruv and the Englewood Eruv is the standard as to how makpid they are with this Chazon Ish. There are those who are makel. There's a tshuva. It is already from Europe. He wrote a tshuva and he said this is not true. He disagreed with the Chazon Ish. He felt that it could go all the way out as far as you want. So what's interesting is that it's somewhat of a heated thing. Like, you know, I personally don't have an opinion on the matter, but I was speaking to Rabbi Welcher from Queens. So he did Shemesh under Rabbi Yashiv, and he said Rabbi Yashiv told him that b'diavad it's good even if it goes out. The halacha is not like the Chazon Ish. The question that's asked, the reductum ad absurdum, is if your wire doesn't have to go straight, so why can't you just have one lechi here on one side of the city, one on the other, and just have a wire that goes like this and a wire that goes like that, and surround your whole city. And certainly people wouldn't feel comfortable with that. So there's the hardline Chazon Ish are going to make sure the wire is perfectly straight, which we endeavor to do in our Eruv. I would never claim that we achieve it because there are always new service lines going up in the middle. It'd be hard to keep up with all of them, and all these little changes, the poles shift or things happen. I can't guarantee that our wires are always perfectly straight from lechi to lechi. I pretty much can guarantee that we don't go more than 3 tvachim. So the most machmer sheet is the Chazon Ish. It has to go straight. The second sheet that says you can have up to 3 tvachim. The problem with 3 tvachim, which would be 3 tvachim, I assume from here, but from here and going out from here. The difficulty with that is that 3 tvachim is usually the idea of lavud. Lavud says if you have any 2 gaps, it closes. So if you have like a chain link fence, all the gaps are less than 3 tvachim, it's considered closed. Lavud doesn't take an object that's here and move it there. So if I have a wire and it's not running over the top of the pole, and it's running over here, I can't say, well, Lavud will move it. Lavud closes gaps, it doesn't move things. So it's difficult to understand how you're allowed to have 3 tvachim, but that is a sheet in halacha, that's a kasha on it. But there is a sheet that says, and that's what we allow, up to 3 tvachim, we allow the wires to be pushed from in between the lechis. The third sheet does even more makel. Rav Heinemann, he says, I look to see if the wire is going straight, but I stand on the opposite side of the street. So if you envision, I'm standing here and I'm looking at 2 telephone poles, one there, and there's a wire running, I won't be able to see with my depths how. So he allows it to the wire, because he says it only has to have the tzura of a Pesach. A tzura is a Pesach. I heard the same thing from the Vizhnitzer Dayan in Muncie, that you heard from the Vizhnitzer Rebbe, if you're looking at it from a distance, if it has that tzura, then that's good enough. You don't have to get so technical to start standing, on the side of the pole and looking straight with the wire to see if it deviates. That's Rav Heinemann's opinion, and then the most makel opinion is that you can allow it to go, which Rav Welcher said that Rav Elyashiv agrees with b'diavad, is you can allow it to move as much as you want. And it's interesting, I was walking with Rabbi Welcher and he said to me, if you want to know why the reason is we don't pass like the Chazon Ish in this matter, it's da-da-da-da. And it's funny because I'll be walking with other rabbanim and they'll say we do pass him like the Chazon Ish. So it's very funny when somebody wants to say you all know that we do this and this and that, but not everybody agrees what we do. So there's very different standards, very different minhagim when it comes to the Eruvin. So
there is a Mekel Dika sheet, if I remember right, that you have a gate in a city, the gate, the door, the Delos doesn't even actually have to be closed, it just has to have the ability to be closed.
Right, there's some sofa like that, and that's
So then
actually
why-
relevant to our Eruv.
Why
if we
wouldn't
get
that
time.
apply to this problem over here, that it's even more, it's just not, you know what I'm saying?
Well,
Is
the
that a
thing with the
separate-
Delis, there's it's because that's based on the Gemara says Yerushalayim would have been a Rish Ram if it didn't have Blossos. The question is, do the Blossos have to be closed? They have to be right to be closed? And
Yeah.
it gets into an interpretation of that Gemara.
I understand,
That was
but I'm
a
saying,
Chabura
according
last
to the sheet, is that it only has to have the ability to be closed, this is clearly, it's just.
It has the ability to move over, but the question is it a Tzuras HaPesach? See,
Yeah,
what you're talking about is in Hilchos Mechitza.
No, I understand.
So a door could have a din mechitza even if it's open, and it's relevant to a new extension that I made to the Eruv. Maybe we'll get to it. Hope we'll get to it. So one last thing in this regard, though, that I wanted before I forget, is that Rav Heinemann, there's a Teferet Yisrael who discusses a shaila in the beginning of his introduction to Maseches Eruvin. He discusses a case where you have a wire, it comes to a pole. Forgetting this whole thing, it comes to a pole and it goes around the pole and then it goes over the top. So Teferet Yisrael says that's considered al gavav. And so the question is why? So he doesn't explain why, he just brings a Masorah from his father that that's considered to be al gavav. So the Teferet Yisrael is quoted by the Mishnah Berurah, and he brings it as the last opinion, so it sounds like the Mishnah Berurah passes like this Teferet Yisrael. So Rav Heinemann says he feels that Pshat in the Teferet Yisrael is, you could argue, but he says that within 3 tvachim of the lechi, the wire is allowed to turn. So when I have my bracket going through the pole, and I discuss with you, this concern that when it's leaving the bracket, it's turning, the wire is turning because the wire goes like this to get the next pole, and like this to get the next pole. So I actually took, I think it was actually this wire, I took it to Rav Heinemann, and I said, even if it goes like this or like this, and he said, yeah, as much as it turns, as long as your lechi is right here, and it's within 3 tvachim, it turns, he would use that Teferet Yisrael to be matir. I don't know too many other Eruvin who rely on that, but that's one of the things also that we use as a sniff lahakel, that if the lechi's here, even if the wire does turn minimally, we have Rav Heinemann's psak to rely on.
Do you do different? You go page community. You interview
based
the
on what they
Rabbanim.
want,
You get
right.
the psakim.
Yeah, and I only work under a posek. I consider myself, I'm the guy who operates the bucket truck. I don't want to get involved in the psakim. I just know what I need to know. If you tell me you want a Rav Heinemann Eruv, if that's what you're ordering, that's what I'll build. So, if you're.
But you have to keep track of all the different possible sets of.
Right, so I keep the opinions
Fluid
straight, but I
circles.
try not to paskin, it just keeps me out of politics.
So in any given poll,
And I'm not qualified, that's the real reason.
in any given poll, you could
Yes, Shemesh.
have the electric at the very top, any other communications below it,
Mhm.
or you have one or the other. Are you talking about a case where there's no electric, then you use the communication line?
Right, that's when these brackets come into play. These are all communication line brackets.
Either there's no electric or there's no usable electric.
There's minimal electricity in it.
What happens when the wire sags? They're saying 3 tvachim.
Okay, I'm not gonna get into that today, but that is a definite problem. All citywide Eruvin allow the wires to sag and even more than 3 tvachim.
If they're sagging, they're gonna blow also most probably.
If they're sagging, not necessarily, because they're very thick cables, they wouldn't blow in a Ruach Mitsuya. In a Ruach Sheni Mitsuya, they would blow. But
All you need is
wouldn't.
one gust of wind and then.
And then while that wind is, according to the Chazon Ish, during that time, right, a hardline
come back.
Chazon Ish, a person who's hardline Chazon Ish would have trouble using our citywide Eruvin because the sag, though, if you did the sugya of kippah, I had something on Daf Yud Beis, I think. The sugya of kippah, where you have you have the kana on top goes like this. So we're talking now about a reverse kippah. It goes down like that. There is a maral in his parish on the Gemara, and based on his parish, a reverse kippah would be good. It's just kind of odd because we generally don't use the maral to paskin, again, especially against other rishonim. So, but the wire sagging, Rav Heinemann says, look, the Ramah writes that you could use a gemi. You could use a string. It's a gemi. He says strings automatically sag. They sag somewhat. So it must be that some amount of sagging is allowed. That's the Ramah. And the way, when you ask Rav Heinemann how much can it sag, he says, I look at it. If it's too much, then I say it doesn't look like it's Oraysa Pesach anymore.
So same vision
If
to
it's-
Rebbe kind of thing.
Yeah, but he won't give you any clear hagdara. He won't give you degrees of sag, or he says it depends. If it's a longer Oraysa Pesach, I'll let it sag more. And if it's shorter, I'll let it sag less. So there were some places in this area where we had things that sagged a lot. I've tried to reduce the amount of sag to the degree that I can, but I can never completely remove it from the area because the wires that we use, we have to use telephone wires and they sag. Another interesting bracket that we have is this bracket. So sometimes they'll come to a pole, they'll end the steel cable, they'll start a new one. So it's going through like this, and this piece comes out. So this is situated flush up against the pole like this, and this comes out, and then you have a wire that continues. The wire is attached into here. So the question is where to put the lechi. So for most Eruvin that were built that I've come encountered with, they put the lechi right underneath one of either this one or this one. They put it on, if you're looking from the sky view.
So consider that an extension of the cable.
And they consider this to be an extension of the cable, and no matter if it's under this one or under this one, it's fine. Rabbi Micah, in his book, he felt that this was minat tzah. He felt that the trajectory of the wire would continue, it would go straight in the middle here, and as the wire was traveling, the wire would continue straight. He said, I would use lavud to close this gap, and I would put my lechi here, not over here.
Why can't it just be fat enough that
Yeah,
it's
mine's to
one
a
piece of
2 inch
wood?
wide.
So, well, that's one of the
3
things
inch
that
wide
one of
blade.
the things that I did is I've widened all the lechis. So, our lechis used to be a 1/2 inch piece of U-guard, it was a black wire molding. You have a ground wire that comes down every pole, and at the bottom 8 to 10 feet, they put a little ground wire molding over it. Now, in our permits to build the Eruv, we only have permission to use ground wire molding. We don't have permission really to use the bigger ones, but that's what I did it, and I don't think they care. Our permission is with Ma Bell, so I can't go back to ask because Ma Bell's defunct. But we use 1 inch conduit, and what I try to do is place the conduit in a way that it's covering this entire area, so that it'll hit this, and it'll hit over here. As well, what I do is I usually tape this thing closed, and I cover it, and then sometimes in addition to that, I'll extend. So let's say the wire comes like this. I would take my own piece of wire and put it all the way over like this. So it eliminates the shiloh.
Alle gute Sachen.
Yeah, so you'll see a lot of stuff. When we have this type of bracket, you'll see that I'll have taped it. I'll probably have underneath it in case, because the tape, I just noticing as I get older, like 5 years goes by, and I don't know, it takes like 2 months for 5 years to go by. And I did it great, and I'm coming looking at it like the tape's already, completely falling off from the sun and the rain and the snow. So underneath the tape, I usually have something else as well to back up, that if the tape comes off, and then I try to position the lechi so that it hits both, because sometimes what I will put could fall off. This won't fall off. So I want it to be b'di'eva, that it should be like this, but I want it to make everybody happy, so I make the lechi big enough to cover both of these things. And these we will see as well when we're out there. The one thing that does...
Why don't you put on like wire mold type thing it's more substantial, usually not a silicone or rubber.
What? Why don't
It's like a boot.
I put a boot on these?
Yeah.
I could. You can make me a boot. I'll put on a boot. Okay. I'm always trying to come up with stronger things, and I do every once in a while. I look at things that I built like 10 years ago. I'm like, that was a dumb way to do it. Because you can't go to air building school. You just have to kind of learn it. But,
I saw you going through air building school.
right.
What has to be checked every Friday? Is this one of these things?
Usually it's the lefties and the wires that we have in place where we have wires running. Usually they will not check for service lines coming off that way. Someone's discussing the service lines in the middle pulling the wires, and I go around once or twice a year and I check for those. They should check for those, but it's very hard to demand that they check for those. So there's another interesting halacha where if you have tachuf, we don't use tachuf in this area, so this is not necessarily for our tour, but I sometimes like to know that it exists as a snif lahakel. If you have the pole like this, and you have a hole in the middle, and the wire comes through the pole instead of over the pole, is that considered al gavo? So, the Rav.
Within 3 of the top or no?
No, it's just in the middle of the pole. So, the reason why this is so nogea is that pretty much anything attached to a telephone pole is bolted all the way through. So, for example, you have something like this. If they want to have a wire attached to a telephone pole, there's so much tension on the wires, they can't use a screw, it'll get ripped out. It has to be bolted all the way through. So if I have something like this, and then the wire is attached, like this, and it continues on, this bolt is a continuation of the wire. It's all one thing. And then this goes through a hole in the pole, it should be tachuv. It would be this exact scenario. Interestingly, those poskim who allow tachuv allow this, and they allow this guy, and they'll say this is tachuv. And they won't even require a lechi here because they say it goes through. My problem
How's
that
that considered the top though?
so how is it considered the top? So what they do is they'll say, dal mehacha, just consider this whole part of the pole up here as if it's not here. So there's a case of the Chazon Ish where he discusses tachuv. And the Mishnah Berurah has a similar case also. The Mishnah Berurah has a case where the wire runs through a groove on the top, but it's still over the top, it's just running through a groove. The Chazon Ish has it where you have
Well, technically,
like
isn't
this.
that the same thing as your
and I
insulator?
have a 2x4 going through here. It's in, I don't know how to, my 3D drawing just died. But there's a 2x4 sitting in this. It's kind of sitting like this. So it's sitting all the way in. So the Chazon Ish says, well, these pieces on the top, I consider like they're not there. Sort of like I have a Tzuras Pesach right here. I actually have a Pesach right here. There's stuff on the top, but that's not a problem. The fact that we put more stuff on the top, you have, enter the door frame, you put extra things on there, it's not a problem. So too here, if I have these things, if I built them all the way up, it wouldn't be a problem. And even if I started placing bricks on top of it, it shouldn't be a problem, because it's al gaba. And so Tzvi Pesach Frank specifically discusses this case and says it's okay. But other people don't want to say it because they have some type of svara that once this bolt goes into the pole, it's like balua, it's like swallowed up by the pole, it's not an independent item. And then there are those who say, well, it depends on how big your hole is. If your hole is very big, which usually with these bolts it is, they make a bigger hole in the bolt and they put the bolt through. And if you use tachuv, then you don't need nearly as many lessons in your Eruv. My question that they have is they allow this for tachuv, and my question is, you notice that this piece, which I've never had a chance to actually take this to a posik. I want to take this to a Herschel shop and ask him. This piece is actually much more vertical than it is horizontal. So basically, your wire is going like this. It's going like this, and down, and then like that. So is that okay? They say it's okay, and I know that they've been doing this for years, and I'm just coming in as a newbie. But that is one of the questions that does plague me that I want to ask one of them one day. I know that they allow these brackets. I'm not sure if they're able to see from the ground as clearly as I see exactly what's the mechanics of what's going on. So that is a question that one day I hope to ask. I guess when I want to make my book, I'll have to get that answer. When are we going to?
We're saying it's a kamisha.
So
Why do we always say, just wrap it around the pole? Why do you have to wrap it on top of it?
Well, here it is see, this wire is on top of this part of the pole.
Yeah, but you could always say, you just wrap it around the pole
But
itself.
if you wrap it around the pole, it's not on top of any part of the pole. Even if I would cut the pole at that point, it would still be going around. Here, it goes over this section of the pole. So you just say dal mehacha to everything that's over here. It's now, it's now running over the top. I got rid of everything here. But if it's going around the pole, if I say dal mehacha, it's still going around. It's no place is it over the top.
Let's go through it.
Yeah. So that's what we don't
I
use.
seem to
tough-
play to this sometimes it's hard to disaster over there.
What?
Because you consider there are always two wires on a pole. So this wire is coming in, and you say dame haki, but the other wire it's actually going over the top. And if it's not dame haki, there's a
Yeah. So you'd have to say the dal mehacha on half the pole and then on the other half, right? Something like that. Right. So. I mean, I was supposed to go till 9:45. That was.
Whatever.
As late as you
more
want.
time.
But I can talk. For all day. I
Yeah,
can go all day.
keep on going.
I don't.
Where's the main sugya for everything you talked about till now is like daf tas, ches and tas?
I just kind of al gabayim. That's really just what's considered al gaba is really the question we're discussing today.
Quick question. Someone told me that it's a minority of the Passaic Eruv, the telephone poles. So where's the rest of the Eruv?
It's fences. I just have to
Which
show you a
fences?
map.
Where?
The
backyards.
fence on the side of River Road, which I can tell you something more about when we stop recording. The fence of the Jewish cemetery. There's fence of the railroad tracks. And,
There's something you built under the overpass by the to get onto the 21 or something. There's like this wood thing. Someone told me.
right,
That's
I
your
could
thing?
tell you about that, that's interesting. You have, this would be a different sugya. You do this in Tel Mislaki. So if a wall, if a hill is steep enough that it goes up 10 tefachim within Daled Amos, that's considered to be mechitza. So the case that they're talking about is you have a mound in Rosh Hashanah. If this is steep enough, which actually comes out to 20, be machmir, it's 25 degrees. In actuality, it's closer to 23, but when we want to build an Eruv, we want to just put an extra couple of degrees to be machmir, in case if there's erosion or other
I'm not
things.
sure if I understand.
So
What's
this is
the street?
considered
How
to be
many
a
degrees is
mechitza.
the street wall?
90.
What?
Street wall is 90?
Straight wall's 90 degrees,
So this
right?
is very, oh,
So
this is
really
nice.
the question is, when you have a fence, this is a wall, right? Now, this is also considered to be a wall. But at what point,
Quarter slope.
when it starts falling down, is it still considered to be a
So
wall?
he's saying it's a quarter, it's about a quarter slope. So it's very-
Yeah, something like that, correct. So when you go onto the 21, so what we use,
21 where?
when you're going
From
on from Brook.
Okay.
There's this like
Um,
wood thing. Everyone else.
So let me see, this is,
21 north.
we have
Right.
a
You go
fence
in.
coming along River Road.
I think it's about north now.
It attaches to
Yeah,
the
north.
underpass. I don't know how to make this picture great, but this is the underpass wall on one side. We have a couple of Tzuras Pesachs crossing the street. And then we get to this. This is a slope on the opposite side. So this slope is considered to be a mechitza in this direction, right? But the wire came across. There was a big pole here, and then I built a fence. It came right up to the bottom of the telemislaki. So the question asked, telemislaki, here the slope goes all the way around this thing. If I have a telemislaki that's in this direction, is it considered to be a mechitza in this direction? So would you say there's a pirza coming into the Eruv from here? Because there's no wall. This wall is only a wall going
You're
in
saying
this
if I
direction.
use, let's say, some steps as a mechitza, does it only go in one direction, or does it go?
In
Or
both
does it go
directions,
crosswise
right.
as well?
Right. Whether steps is considered to be a telemislaki is machlokas, but yeah, some people say that steps are a telemislaki. If it goes up 10 tefachim within Daled Amos, it's fine. So what I did, so a lot of poskim told me no, it's a mechitza in both directions. In order to make, the one Rav here in Passaic said he wanted me to build a wall going up this way to close off from this direction. So when you're getting up to 21, you'll see I actually had fun building a fence going, I had to miter all the cuts so they'd be at an angle of, and
This
they're
is
they're
up
straight.
Brook,
When you're going Brook onto the
21 north.
to the 21 north.
By
Under
the
the
river?
overpass, there's this
Right,
like
by the
wood
overpass, you'll see there's a little structure there, and then one of the
Under the
Rabbanim
overpass by
asked
the
me to
river?
build going up. Now, it seemed to me, in my humble opinion, it was Amaratzis. I thought that Thomas Lockett is a mechitza in both directions. But somebody wanted it, and that's part of what I try to also bring to Eruvin when I work in other communities, is that a lot of the politics that gets involved with Eruvin is that this Rav wants